cubicles that the people they supported lived in. In other words, an on-site developer as opposed to an on-site customer. When one of the people they were supporting in our business needed a change made in order to be able to do their job better, in order that the agents could better sell policies, they just go ahead and make it. And an hour later, it was done. How many of you can make a small change in an hour? Probably not many, not in a big insurance company. They can. If it's something larger, they go back to the group of other people that are skilled in that particular application area, and they'll come and deliver it very quickly with a minimum of bureaucracy and red tape. It's a total transformation of the organization over a period of about 4 or 5 years. In a sense, IT disappeared. Agile disappeared. They just became part of our business. I think that's the end state. Oh yes, yes. The dramatic increase in profitability. They made billions of pounds of additional profit over what they were doing before. What's not to like? One more thing. Some friends of ours toured some factories, some lean factories in Japan last year. They asked in the Toyota factory, they asked the engineers, on a scale of 1 to 100, how good do you think you are in terms of how good you could be? And the Toyota engineers said, oh, 25, 30% of the way to where we ought to be. They asked in a couple of other factories, and the engineers said there, oh, we're 90%. Which one do you think is right? I'm inclined to believe the 30%, that there's a tremendous amount of room for continuous improvement. Now, who's going to make the improvement? Partly, it's the leadership. We've had many classes where at the end the students will say, if only our leaders would do this, and if only they'd let us do that. And then we present this to the leadership, and they say, I never told them they couldn't do that. I wouldn't object to that. Why didn't they ask? Why didn't they take initiative? Why didn't they do something? An awful lot of the management restrictions that you perceive are in your own heads. They're in your own fears. They're not in the deliberate actions or beliefs of the management teams that you work under. So take initiative. Try it. Forgiveness is easier than permission.
So the future, I'm Micah Martin, by the way, and thank you all. This has been a wonderful conference. I've had a good time here, so thank you. The future in my mind is software craftsmanship. Software craftsmanship. ¿Y cómo se dice software craftsmanship en español? Artisanal. So, software is a fairly new industry, and I think it came out of electrical engineering, and people assumed it was an engineering type of industry. And so they started to do software projects like they would do engineering projects. For example, if you're going to build a bridge, you need to analyze what this bridge is going to do, how big is it going to be, how much weight does it need to hold. And once you figured out those things, once you finish the analysis, you need to design the bridge, make some plans, and make some small models, and test them in a wind tunnel to see if they're going to collapse. And once you've designed a good bridge, then you actually go up and build it. So they applied these same strategies to software. Right? We're going to analyze the software problem, then we're going to design a solution, and then we're going to implement it. What Agile did, I think Agile is a realization that software is not an engineering practice. Those same techniques do not work in software. What works is software craftsmanship, people who care about the software they're writing and they want to deliver something of high quality. Let me talk about the Agile conference in North America. I have seen a huge shift in that conference. 8 years ago when it started, there were lots of people who were dedicated software developers. You would walk through the hallways and there were laptops out everywhere and everybody was programming, pair programming together, writing whatever. And over the 8 years, I've seen that dwindle and the number of programmers diminished over those 8 years. And last year I was just stunned because the conference was taken over by, well, excuse me, by Scrum Masters. And they didn't like to write code. You didn't see people with their laptops open writing code. And well, that makes me kind of sad. In her talk yesterday, Mary implied that Scrum is insufficient to write good software. And I agree with that. And I would add to that that Scrum is unnecessary to write software. If you get a group of highly skilled developers who care about the software they write and who are familiar with Agile practices and techniques to write good software, you don't need a Scrum Master to do it. And look back to the Middle Ages. Let's go back to the Middle Ages again. If you were a prince or a king and you wanted a cathedral, you would find a master craftsman, a master stoneworker. And you tell him, I want to build a cathedral, and you tell him how big it was. And then he would go off and hire other craftsmen. And together these craftsmen would design the cathedral and put it together. There was no Scrum Master telling them how to do it. Think about the Sistine Chapel. Michelangelo painted that whole thing, and he had people helping him. There wasn't a bunch of Scrum Masters in there telling them how to do it or cheering them on. These were craftsmen. They cared about the quality of their work. They knew what they wanted to build, and they did the best job that they could. So the future, I agree with Tom. I think Agile is not the future. It's going to disappear. The future is the developers out there. Developers need to realize that software is a craft, and that to be a good software developer, you need to be a craftsman. You need to care about the code you write, and you need to constantly learn and improve your craft, become a better craftsman. And the developers can work together very efficiently to produce great software. And that's what I believe the future is.
And I'm Matt, and I know a lot of you guys know me, and I want to echo everybody else's comments up here. It's been absolutely tremendous to see this many people show up. I was helping out a little bit on the early days of the conference coming together, and I remember conversations that we had over beer one night saying, we hope to get 150 people. This has been spectacular. The growth here and the interest here is just wonderful. We've got almost every country in South America represented, and even a couple from North America. So that being said, the other nice thing about going last is I get to alter all my comments based on what everybody else said. So I'll do that. 3 years ago, I got interviewed at a software development best practices conference in Boston, one of the few times I actually got to work at home. And they asked me the very same question, what's the future of Agile? And the comment that I made to them at that point was, within 10 years, anybody that was doing software was either going to be doing it using an Agile methodology, or they would be outsourcing. And they would be outsourcing to somebody who was doing Agile. And the very basic reason for that at that time was because the world is a very dynamic place, and we need to be able to respond. And the whole premise behind Agile is, rather than a set of practices or anything else, it's actually being able to respond to change. Now, over those 3 years, I've done a lot of thinking and a lot of research and a lot of looking, and what I'm finding is, and first of all, for those of you that don't know me, I'm a methodologist by trade. So I work in methodologies, pretty much all the various different ones. And what I've found is that the most valuable thing in the Agile Manifesto is not the practices or the fact that it's an umbrella or the principles even, but the fact that there are values. The very first lines on the very first page of manifesto.org are the 4 values that we say that we hold true in an Agile world. I believe that every company needs to have their own set of values. They don't need to be the Agile values. You need to look at them and find out what you hold as an organization. And that needs to be permeated down into the organization. And you need to look at it from a very holistic point of view. No organization out there is an island. Every organization works in an area. They work in a vertical. They work in a country. They work in a community, in an environment, in an ecosphere. And what we're finding is that all of these organizations are interrelated. They're interrelated with respect to the economy. Look what's going on in the world with respect to the economy. And this whole level of interconnectedness means that we have to hold what we do and the values that we hold at a much higher level. So the values I hold have to integrate somehow with the values you hold in your company and their company and so on and so on. So we have to look at what we do and how we do it and try to make sure that it is a sustainable pace, and the whole team concept is the whole team with respect to the whole world. So we're global now. You know, we're down here. All of us come from different locations. Many of you come from different locations. The world has gotten a lot smaller. We use software every day to make it smaller and smaller and smaller. We need to be craftsmen again. We need to practice our art. We need to make it work well, and we can't accept shoddy craftsmanship. We don't like to buy products that are shoddy. We shouldn't make products that are shoddy. So I believe the future is going to be continually shrinking the world to the point where we're all essentially working interactively. Many of you have heard Mary talk about open source. Open source is essentially doing software all over the place. Everybody can participate. Everybody does participate. And that's what makes it absolutely wonderful. That was what makes it so integrated, and what makes it work so well. That's where we're going to go.
Bueno, tiempo para preguntas.
So as I was listening to Micah cheering him on, every word, you reminded me of some of my friends who work in open source environment, because the one thing that my friend who I know from Brazil who works in open source said is, maybe we test and maybe we don't, and maybe we integrate and maybe we don't, but there's one thing that we do, and that's why open source works, and that is we care. We care deeply about what it is that we're doing. And I wonder how many here work in open source at all? And is it not true that you learn more about how to do good programming in open source than most any other place? It's a good, you know, if you want your code torn up and criticized real fast, that's a good way to get it done. We have some things we could learn from the open source movement. It's the one way of doing software that I don't think would benefit from the kinds of things we do in Agile. They actually don't get in the same room. They don't talk by video. They document everything by writing. In fact, if 3 people get together and talk in an open source environment, that's bad, because it means the rest of the team is excluded from the conversation. So we don't have all the answers in Agile. And there's other ways to do things besides the way we do things. But good, high-quality code that gets the job done, that's, you know, there's no substitute for it.
Well, if there are no questions, how about some comments?
Tenemos preguntas. Una aclaración corta para fomentar la participación. Tenemos felices regalos de los felices sponsors para cada uno que haga una pregunta, por ejemplo. Claro, si la pregunta es como malísima, ahí el equipo del fondo vota si sí o no. I'll translate that for you afterwards. I can make a summary. We'll just offer them a gift from some of the sponsors if they make a question. Okay. Maybe the rest didn't.
Lots of questions now, right?
Okay. Yeah, that's what we were trying to do. We're buying them. Thank you.
Okay, a couple of years ago there was a trend towards automated generated code.
Oh.
Yeah. You're saying now that we are going to be craftsmen of the software. So there's no more this trend to tools that generate code, I think. What do you think about it?
Automated code generation, Karen.
How does it work for you?
Very bad.
Features, I think, it's worse.
It's worse?
For some features, particular features.
It works.
It works.
So there was a software product in the United States in the 80s called Software Through Pictures. And the idea was that you would draw structure diagrams and you would hit a button and it would develop code. And it developed code. It developed thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of unmaintainable lines of code. And so people stopped using it because they couldn't afford to maintain it because nobody knew the code. And it wasn't well written because it was automated. So I believe that that trend has come and that trend has gone. And some people will use it in a very limited sense because there's some things that you can do with it. But there's an awful lot of stuff out there that you can't do with it.
Or Microsoft buy it.
Yes, I think the model-driven architecture paradigm, that's the idea. And I share your ideas of the artisanal, okay, that's all. But I think it's not you can apply this idea in all the software you need to do. Not at this moment, perhaps in the future we have another the thing, but now the real fact is that you must to do the same work a lot of time. Yes? And in that case, the model-driven architecture is a good approach. In the model-driven, don't work yet, I know that. But as a concept, it's not a bad idea, I think. It's
Lots of great concepts out there.
I don't want
So
no.
I think there's a place for code generation. If you take Ruby on Rails, maybe some of you have seen that. On Ruby on Rails, you just type a command and it'll generate a bunch of code for you. It's just stubs. But all the real work still has to be done. You have to dig in there and put the creative code in there, the actual functionality you have to put in there. So I believe there is a place for some code generation. But the craftsmanship still has to be there. I mean, take back in World War II, the Japanese, long history of samurais, and all the samurais had swords. And the swords were made by craftsmen. It took a lot of time and care to build those swords. In World War II, all the officers had to have a sword, and they didn't have enough craftsmen. So they industrialized it, and they made a process to make the same sword over and over and over. Now, it was a good sword, and it worked. But if they wanted a new sword, they needed craftsmen again to come along and rebuild that sword.